Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world that you are, and welcome to around 120 participants in what is proving to be a very popular and engaging topic. A pandemic tidal wave, the next crisis in mental health is the title for today's session. Tackling the so-called fourth wave when the pandemic is declared over, is it? Probably not. We all know that physical and mental health impacts will continue for a long time. Workplace Options is a valued partner of WBN, has been for some time, and although today is not about product, they excel in the global EAP space. Huge activity in this area as employers struggled to make sure a coherent and coordinated response was and is evident. The COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting economic recession have negatively affected many people's mental health and created new barriers for people already suffering from mental illness and substance use disorders. During the pandemic, about 4 in 10 adults in the US have reported symptoms of anxiety or depressive order, a share that's been largely consistent globally and a 4-fold increase from normal levels. And many adults are reporting specific negative impacts on their mental health and well-being, such as difficulty sleeping, 36%, eating, 32%, increases in alcohol consumption and substance use, down at 12%, and worsening chronic conditions at 12%, due to worry and stress over the coronavirus. As the pandemic wears on, ongoing and necessary public health measures expose many people to experiencing situations linked to poor mental health outcomes, such as isolation and in particular job loss. We all know that we have handled this in different ways, some embracing the change and others fighting new or existing issues. Let us tap into the Workplace Options insight and expertise to find out more. I'm delighted to introduce Christian Mainguy, SVP, Key Strategic Relationships, EMEA and Quebec, who will in turn introduce our panelists. Christian, over to you.
Thanks, Alan. Thank you very much. This is a great opportunity for us to talk about this topic of pandemic and the consequences in terms of mental health. I'm going to be the moderator of this webinar. I'm really pleased. I'm proud of being that moderator. We'll have time throughout this session to answer any questions you might have. So we encourage you really to send us your questions through the questions box that you can see on your screen. So please do it. We're also pleased to let you know that all attendees can have access to a copy of Workplace Options, a Resident's Return to the Workplace, that includes a vlog about adjusting to the present and returning to the workplace. And also we will have access to a report, a joint report between Workplace Option and Remark, titled The Stress Pandemic at Work, What We Learned from Consumer Data. Both publications are available in both English and French and can be downloaded at any time throughout these sessions from the handouts pane that you can see on your screen. Copies of this document will also be shared with you, don't worry, via email following this session. Now, I would like to introduce our two panelists. Today, we have with us Mary-Hélène Gornick. Mary-Hélène is Senior Vice President of Global Products at Workplace Options. Mary-Hélène has more than 37 years of experience in the healthcare, airline, oil and gas, retail, financial, and engineering industries. And at Workplace Options, Mary-Hélène has been a key individual in expanding the global footprint of the organization, in addition to developing a global training department that offers a wide range of training solutions for companies on more than 70 topics. Welcome, Mary-Hélène.
Welcome, Christian.
We are also joined today by James Sussex. James is a clinical team lead at Workplace Options and has accumulated years of experience working in EAP delivery programs. He has extensive experience working with crisis management, risk and safeguarding, trauma, depression, and anxiety. We are really pleased to have you both with us. Now, starting with the question, I just want to share with you some statistics in addition to what Alan just shared, and some statistics come from the Joint report by Remark and Workplace Options. Stress levels among workers is at all-time high. In the survey, you can read the result highlight that 29% of employed individuals are more likely to feel often always stressed. 18% are more likely to self-report having poor mental health, and 19% are more likely to be diagnosed with mental health issues. James, these figures highlight a dire situation among working individuals. So why is it important for organizations to focus on and take care of employees' mental health?
Yeah, thanks, Christian. I think, it comes back to prevention is always better than the cure. And what we're talking about there, of course, is, sort of a decrease in productivity and a lack of sort of inefficiency in teams. If we're looking after mental health, then we're fostering perhaps a culture where there's less time off for mental health issues. We're fostering increased morale. And, the signs of productivity dropping, we need to pay attention to what happens before that. So, for example, the employee that disengages from the social aspect of the team, perhaps in team meetings and otherwise. It might not be that there are obvious signs that there's a dip in productivity, but actually there might be something going on there that's less obvious that we need to take care with, and so in that sense, it's better to capture that at that stage rather than, or as opposed to when productivity has decreased already.
Marilyn, some additional comments?
Yeah, I think, thank you, Christian. I think what many organizations don't realize when they focus on performance, that the status of your mental health is a real key driver in performance. So I think we look at other external or other motivators around performance, but at the end of the day, it's how you feel and how integrated you are, head, heart, in terms of doing a good job. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you're in a situation where you are having a situation with poor mental health or high anxiety, you're very distracted. So think about what that means in terms of someone who is tasked with developing financial reports or scientific studies. If you're in a collaborative environment where you need to work together to come up with a new product or a solution to a current quality issue, you need to collaborate with your peers in terms of looking at data. You need to be present in the moment to think about what could possibly impact the task that I'm charged with. And when you're not okay, when you're not feeling that you're able to do that, it really does impact in those ways. So, it can impact not only productivity, which we always put at the top of the list, but it can really impact accuracy. It can impact timeliness of reports. It can impact the synergy between individuals in a work group. And I think the other thing that's really important, both you and Alan gave us some really important statistics today about what, in fact, the numbers are, across the world that indicate this is a huge mental health crisis situation. And I would encourage everyone in the audience to look at some of those numbers and sort of do a quick run the numbers for your own organization. So, Christian, you mentioned that 29% of any employees in a group feel stressed always or always or often. Okay. Well, if you take that 29% and apply it to your workforce, let's just do a quick number. If you've got 500 employees, that means that you're looking at 125 to 150 individuals who are in that frame. And what does that mean for you? Well, that means everything that we just talked about in terms of how stress affects performance. But the other thing that it means is that when you look at that number, those are the individuals who are feeling stressed all of the time, who are at high risk for somatic situations, for backache, neck ache, accidents, those types of situations. So you can apply it to your key positions, you can apply it to safety situations, you can apply it to customer service, you can apply it to sales. You can get very concrete in terms of looking at what these numbers mean within your organization.
I know thank you. I mean, it's a matter of performance, but I know we also have today people from risk management. So Mary-Hélène, is it also a matter of security potentially?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a matter of security, sort of both internally and security from external threats. So internally, all organizations have very rigorous security measures in place. But one of the things that we know when you're under stress in highly stressed positions, you're distracted. So at that point, when you're distracted, you can miss things. You can easily miss things. You can actually not miss them in terms of you don't see them, or miss them in terms of you misjudge the impact. And then I think when you look at external threats, you've got to have everyone who is responsible for security of the agency really focused on being responsible. So sometimes being overzealous, because what we're seeing now is the impact of cybercrime is really escalating in all organizations. And as we've seen with some of the recent breaches, it can impact organizations that have a ripple on other organizations. So it's something that the risk for that is very high, and we have to really focus our attention to it and start thinking about how well-being is connected with our ability to stay secure.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you very much. I mean, yeah, indeed, cyber risk has increased dramatically. I mean, and cyber attacks actually during the pandemic. So, looking now at the impact of the pandemic on mental health, we see that employees' mental health has been severely affected over the past 18 months. Looking at the US, in the US, adults reported to increased levels of mental health conditions, substance use, and suicidal thoughts. According to the Center for Disease Control, 40% of US adults reporting struggling with mental or substance use during the pandemic. Now, if you go in the UK, the Mental Health Organization found that feelings of loneliness, hopelessness increased dramatically, and suicidal thoughts also increased as a result of the pandemics. In France, depression rate has almost doubled and increased from 10% before the pandemic to 19% as a result of this pandemic. And if we go to India, earlier this year, COVID crisis took a toll on individuals who faced strong negative impacts of the pandemics on their mental health. Frontline workers particularly faced stigma in their communities and suffered from burnout and anxiety due to the overwhelming work demands. These figures tell the same story in many different countries, leading us to think that mental health has become a global concern. What have you observed over the past 12 months in terms of the effects of COVID on the well-being of individuals? Maybe James first.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Christian. And those numbers certainly ring true. We've absolutely heard about and seen an increase in anxiety since COVID, and this is from an employee assistance program perspective. As soon as the pandemic came in, and we were hearing about all the sort of dramatic stories on the news and the figures and all the different measures that were coming in, it was anxiety straight away from pretty much everywhere, all different sort of walks of life, all different jobs, and you know, whether that was about something immediate or something perceived that could happen in the future. So absolutely, you know, a tenfold increase in anxiety, but also in terms of risk as well. And we're talking about suicidal thoughts, self-harm, substance misuse. You know, we normally operate at sort of 2% of our caseload is a risk caseload, and since the pandemic, it's now looking more like 10%. So that's a huge increase, and whether or not that's direct or indirect, because that could be as a result of something that's directly related to the pandemic, or it could be that the pandemic has reduced people's capacity for coping. And so in that sense, you know, something happens. If the pandemic hadn't happened, perhaps there would have been more room for coping, and therefore wouldn't have escalated to a risk situation. So both direct and indirect we're seeing. But I think it's important to mention as well that, you know, the effects of the pandemic on what we're sort of calling the forgotten front line of workers, and we're talking about sort of blue collar, you know, supermarket workers and sort of people that were on the front lines the whole time alongside the healthcare workers, but the focus was very much on the healthcare workers, whereas, you know, supermarket workers, teachers were also all in, working every day a lot of the time, and without perhaps the correct PPE and equipment and tools to do the job under those circumstances. So we've also seen a huge increase in anxiety in those populations as well.
Thank you, James. Really fantastic information. Mary-Hélène, would you have something to complement?
Sure. You know, Christian, I think the numbers and the risk figures that James discussed are real, and we're seeing that every day. And we're seeing, in many organizations, those risk figures are higher. You know, if you look at some organizations that have been hit either financially, you know, the travel industry, retail industry in some sectors. And so you can see those risk factors even higher than that 10%. But I think one of the things that we've really observed is that the impact of isolation and the impact of being disconnected from your community, from your families, from your social circle, you know, the people that keep you going, the people that you can go out with on a Friday night and, you know, have a chat and sort of, you know, review your week. You know, I think the fact that it's not just the workplace that's been disrupted, but it's pretty much every fabric of our society has been disrupted. And the impact of that on the individual is really huge. Now, that doesn't mean that shows itself in very dramatic ways all the time. It can be very subtle, and it can be a situation where the individual themselves doesn't even, they know that there's something not right, but they don't know exactly what it is. So one of the things that we've observed is that there's been a huge focus, and rightly so, on the management supervisory staff in organizations to be more aware of the behaviors that they're observing and what those behaviors mean and what people might need, you know, who are exhibiting those behaviors. So I think when we look at the organization and we see the types of individual cases that James is talking about, we have to look at, you know, the workplace itself, the work environment, and where we work every day, and who is watching, you know, the temperature there of what's going on, and that's our managers. So I think that is the one thing that we've really observed that's been striking, and that is that this has brought on new challenges for anyone in supervisory or management position, And they really, it's added quite a bit to them because this is not their wheelhouse. Emotional well-being is not their wheelhouse. It's other technical or management issues. And so that's a really important area to focus on going forward.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, the pandemic has no doubt increased our level of anxiety and feeling of safety. And what you just said, Marie-Hélène, and it's proved by the WPO findings. I mean, we've collected data recently over the past months since April, and we've identified the top 3 difficulties encountered by individuals. Number 1 is isolation and loneliness. Number 2 is the impact of the pandemic on social interaction that you just mentioned. And number 3 is still the fear of contracting the virus. It's been now, 18 months of living with COVID, and there is a sense that individuals are experiencing fatigue in adapting to the changing environments in terms of going in and out of lockdowns and adapting to restrictions. But Marielle, are we out of the clear of the pandemics, and should we think that everything is back to normal now?
Oh, how we wish. No, we're not. I don't know what phase we're in, Christian. You know, if you kind of look back to March 2020 and you say that was phase 1 and we were all taken by surprise, I think now we're in a bit of something called, you know, COVID fatigue. And, you know, 18 months is a long time. And I think when this started, you know, many people thought, well, you know, we'll work from home for a few months, we'll get a little bit of a break in our routine, and, you know, we'll be back by summer. And that didn't happen. And, you know, I think even with the advent of vaccines, there was a thought that, you know, this is the light at the end of the tunnel and this is the end. And now we have additional variants. And so we're even organizations who have set dates for opening and closing offices continue to change those dates. So all of this uncertainty actually adds to the threat for our mental health in terms of how are we going to deal with this. So I think, you know, it's not over. And when it's over, you know, there's going to be life after COVID, and we don't really know what that looks like. We know that we're all going to be more safety conscious about public health and safety techniques. We know that workforces are going to be dramatically changed because, you know, workers have sort of looked at the work that they've done over the past 18 months. And if they've been at work, they want to be safe, and they want to make sure that that there are protocols in place to keep them safe. If they've worked at home, they may not want to go back to long commutes and that hectic schedule that they had before. So COVID's not over, and COVID, we don't know when it will be over, but we do know that it's going to be very, very important to keep our eye on emotional well-being for months and months to come, and to really look very closely at our organizations to identify where are the risks. You know, where are the environmental risks? Where are the, you know, the actual working condition risks, so that we can actually move forward into a better place once this is over.
Yeah, thank you very much. James, on your side, I mean, what's your clinical perspective? What's your view on it?
Yeah, for sure, and I very much echo the sentiments by Mary-Ellen there. You know, from a clinical perspective, just because we're sort of losing some of the more obvious signs that the pandemic might be, excuse me, coming to a close. So, for example, face masks not being mandatory, social distancing, perhaps easing up, it doesn't mean that that anxiety eases. You know, anxiety is a response to threat, risk, and danger. And you know, when the pandemic came in, the idea or the notion underneath is that we're in danger. And so, you know, the anxiety isn't an incorrect reaction to the situation, and it's a bit like a jack in the box in that sense. Anxiety is there to be released at the moment that it needs to be released, and it's a lot harder to put it back in the box than it is for it to sort of spring out. So the anxiety, we're going to see that carry on, and for the very simple reason that people will be carrying with them the baggage of what they've been through throughout the pandemic. And even if it's not sort of directly related, if they haven't had bereavements or they haven't had COVID, then probably, definitely, they will know somebody that has. And so people will be carrying a lot of baggage with them. And, you know, in terms of that, you know, it's also about the language that people have, the tools that they have to be able to cope with that anxiety. And so that all sounds good. And if we know about anxiety, if we're informed about anxiety, then we can perhaps have a bit more sort of self-compassion and understanding about what's going on. That rarely happens. And actually what rarely happens is that people will find creative ways to cope with what's going on for them. And some of those creative ways can be effective in the short term, in the medium to long term, not very effective. And so we're talking about substance misuse. We have seen an increase in alcohol dependency or use of alcohol as a coping strategy with the anxiety that's come from the pandemic, and drug use as well. And of course, that brings with it an ongoing risk to sort of the cybersecurity side of things, because we're working from home. We're perhaps not around teams and colleagues and friends. Therefore, how are we dealing with that anxiety in the moment when we're in the comfort of our own home?
Okay, so we're not over with anxiety, and maybe now we can understand why we've chosen the title of the webinar, you know, the pandemic tidal wave. The next crisis is mental health. This is really not the moment to slow down in supporting employees. This is now or never the moment to invest in the prevention and promotion of your employee mental health. We often talk about the transition of many employees in many organizations to remote work because of COVID. But in fact, the individuals in safety sensitive positions like factories, construction, have been working the same way since the start of the pandemic. Is that way consistent, and what can organizations do to ensure their well-being and keep their morale up? James?
Yeah, so you know, there's definitely going to be an ongoing need to be more conscious of individuals' well-being. You know, and I think the kind of solution to that is to create a culture of acceptance around mental health and around well-being. But that doesn't mean sort of micromanaging. That doesn't mean sort of enforcing. You know, it's about offering the space for people to be able to come and talk about what it is that's going on for them, and feel able to engage in that as well. Yeah, definitely.
And what would you recommend as viable solutions?
So as well as the sort of internal stuff and, you know, line management and making sort of regular line managements and check-ins, you know, there's the external as well. And for example, we, you know, part of what we offer is our single session therapy, and that is basically therapists being ready for sort of relationship and dialogue right now. So as soon as the phone rings, you know, that's it. We know that we're into a session and we're sort of getting down to it. And we have that time, you know, we've created that sort of time and space to be able to do that. It's having you know, it's a good conversation and the power of a good conversation, listening, not just hearing, but really listening and engaging and collaborating as well. So it might not be that that has to be an internal sort of system that's set up. We offer that here, and I think that's something that's very, very useful.
Marilyn, any additional solution you could mention?
Yeah, I would like to mention one solution. You know, I think to James's point about anxiety and how it's there as a protection for when anyone is in connected with risk or danger, but it's hard to put it back in the box once it's out. And one of the tools that we have seen that's been enormously effective in organizations has been using the technique of mindfulness. It's been adopted in many organizations, and it's been adopted, we can see it from the top down. So at the executive level, because obviously there's anxiety there as well. And, you know, there are a number of techniques that are involved in mindfulness, but just the whole idea of stopping, you know, just when you have that feeling, just stopping and taking a breath and taking stock of what's going on, like why am I having these feelings of anxiety, and then focus on what we need to do and what we need to do next. So it's about being present in the moment, about focusing on the task at hand, about eliminating, you know, all the multitasking that we do, and staying focused on accomplishing one thing. And that is much easier said than done. And it's also a technique that can be effective across organizations. So it's effective when you're a factory worker. It's effective when you're in a service center doing customer service calls. It's effective across the board. And so as organizations can think about, you know, how to adopt techniques that are really proven to be very effective, and looking at what are my various audiences in the organization, and how do I make sure that they hear about it, that they see that these techniques are relevant to them in the work that they do, and then they have the acceptance and the permission within the organization to use that. So it becomes a common language, you know, in the organization and in teams. But mindfulness is really an effective tool.
Yeah, indeed, mindfulness is very effective for so many different situations, like organizing a webinar, for example.
Yes.
Reflecting on the past 18 months, certainly all organizations have encountered some changes and will continue to face changes when heading back to the workplace. What type of challenges will organizations and individuals face when returning to the workplace, and what impact will that have on individuals' mental health? James?
Yeah, sure. I mean, and it's, you know, as we were saying about the anxiety and sort of the anxiety doing its job, you know, we were sort of hearing, you know, more and more as time went on about the anxiety sort of bringing people into a bit more of an individual perspective. And what I mean by that is, you know, as workplaces closed down, you know, a focus sort of switched from perhaps an organizational identity to what do I need to do to keep myself and my family safe, my immediate family. And that will be difficult, I think, perhaps very widely difficult to unwind from, and for people to come back into an organizational identity, you know, and sort of fit back in with organizational culture and values, and sort of come away from that sort of anxious thinking that is sort of leading them perhaps more to think about themselves and their immediate family. So, you know, we're looking at things like some of the telltale signs might be absences. Again, you know, sort of perhaps people aren't sort of they're finding it difficult to come back to the workplace, and therefore they're taking prolonged time or periodic time. It might not be one prolonged sort of period of time that they take off, but it might be more about that sort of ad hoc time, a day here, a day there, and how often is that sort of happening. But you know, I like to think of it as a bit of a rock and a hard place, because people will be bringing with them that baggage from before, but they'll also be concerned about what next. And with anxiety, a what if turns to a statement pretty quickly. So what if I get COVID? When somebody is thinking in an anxious way, they will then start thinking, I'm going to get COVID. I have COVID. And actually, you know, this is all thinking. Might not be any evidence for that. And the weight of that will come from what they've brought with them from that time that they've been away from the company.
Yeah, thank you, James. Yeah, it's confirmed. I mean, when you talk about fear of infection, you know, it's in the top 3 worry, concern of the of employees. And Marilyn, at the organizational perspective, what would you say?
Well, I think there's a huge challenge, you know, for organizations as we look at returning to the workplace. Very simply put, you know, some organizations are calling this the Great Resignation or the Great Quit, because we're seeing many organizations suffer from a mass exodus of individuals who are leaving and going. They're not leaving the workplace. They can't leave the workplace. They may be leaving your organization and going to something else. So why are they leaving is the big question that many organizations have. Obviously, when you've gone through something as traumatic as this pandemic over the past 18 months, you're really reflecting on your own life and your own priorities and what's important to you. And as you know, as we've talked about over and over in this session, you know, when you're facing danger, you really get to that place and you're like, what is important to me and how do I want to live my life? So organizations really have to understand what that means for them and reorder and look at the way they work, the policies and the procedures. But I think you know, one of the things that that we're seeing is that there is really this focus on mental health and the importance of it, and so how someone can feel, you know, that they are cared for, that they're in a safe place when they work. So this is a big challenge for organizations that, and we're seeing this across many different organizations. It's not just the HR function that's concerned about this, but we're seeing that our health and safety and security professionals are looking at the work environment with a different view, a view to psychological health and safety. So big challenge for organizations that lie ahead in terms of identifying what changes they need to make and what their new strategies are.
Thank you for this last answer. I mean, I think we are at the end of the presentation, and maybe it's now time to go to the Q&A session. I understand, Alan, that there have been some questions that have been raised by the audience. Alan?
Yeah, indeed. I'll mix them up a little bit because there's one in particular here, just through what's been heard during the conversation. I think that things have come to the fore. So I think it's sort of there's one piece to Mary Ellen here and probably one piece to James to a certain extent. I think, are organizations guilty of thinking it's not us? You know, you made the point about that 10% of people, 20% of people, that's 1 in 5 around the table. So, you know, are organizations guilty of thinking you know, we're okay? Yeah. And the second part to the question is the language that she used, James, around, you know, is some of the language that's being used almost compounding the problem? Things like return to work. You made the point about most people or some people have never been away. So when people speak about return to work, does that compound the issue a little bit? So there's a good question in there. Yeah. Ariel?
So I think to the question of it's not us, I don't think we can say it's not us, because, you know, having been in this wide global pandemic, there's been many changes to society and to organizations and to the way that we work. But there's also been a change in terms of what workers want and how workers work, and what they need to feel good about the work that they do. And to that extent, that affects all organizations. And so I don't think that there are any organization that can escape the actual sort of taking a look inwardly and saying, how are we doing? You know, how are our people doing? How is our organization doing? Are we communicating enough? Do we, you know, are there changes that we need to make in terms of the way we work or the way we do business? Because it's not just you as an organization, you're not isolated, but you're in a very large ecosystem. And as that ecosystem is changing, it's going to have an impact on you in some way. So my answer to that would be, it is you. You're part of this, and you have to really think about what part is it that I'm playing in this.
Yep. And James, the language question.
Yeah, and in terms of the language, it's interesting. I think, you know, we've heard the phrase there, return to work, and there's this notion. I think there can be a notion around the sort of pandemic and, you know, being back in the workplace about returning. We've heard things like return to work. We've heard new normal. We've heard, you know, a real notion about let's get back to where we were, and it's not going to happen like that. You know, there is no going back. There's only going forward. And I think there is something in that, you know, the way that we phrase that. If we sort of perhaps foster a sense of we're going forward here, we're moving forward, and transparency is key in that, because actually we're moving forward and we don't know what that looks like. We're going to have to learn and sort of grow as an organization and as individuals as we go forward in that process. But actually there is no going back. That's over. And I think there could be something in that, you know, in terms of how we sort of create that new culture and the culture of acceptance that we were talking about earlier. You know, perhaps that could be a key part of that.
And that's about the language that people use, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that, actually. No going back, only looking forward. That's a thoughtful way of putting it, very much so. On the monitoring of risks, Mary Ellen, you brought this up, a question, and many of our WBN brokers have fed back to us that they see a lot more of a marriage now between risk management and HR in respect of the pandemic amplifying mental health issues, etc., etc. And interesting to hear that you brought up the health and safety as well, because clearly that is an area as well. So people are going to need, they may not have the tools to monitor that right now. Yeah, they may have a different set of tools that give them a different set of management information effectively. So they may need new tools. Just a little bit of a comment on that. And then again, I think it's more or less a part of the same question, really. It came up at the same time to James, was when people identify these risks through monitoring them, reach out in relation to tackling it, but then don't get any traction maybe with that individual, what's the next moves after that?
Well, I'll take the first one about the risk and working together with the health and safety and what are the new tools. I think we're about to really dig deep and find out some new tools that will be very effective. One of the really important thing that's happened over the past 18 months is there is a new ISO standard on psychological health and safety. So this is the first time that for the health and safety professionals, there is focus not only on physical safety in the workplace, but also psychosocial safety, and what is the impact of the workplace on the mental health of the individual and ultimately the organization. So I think that one of the very positive things that's happened for this ordeal that we've been through is, one, that it's really put a focus on mental health and what we need to make sure that we've got an environment that's conducive and positive to an individual's mental health. But the other is that we've got partners. HR can partner with the risk managers, health and safety, to really look at how do we evaluate the workplace. One of the things we've been doing more is well-being risk assessment. So working alongside the health and safety professionals to identify, the risk related to tight deadlines, the risk related to, concentration where there's, very heavily noisy environments, or just this whole experience with the COVID itself. So new tools are on the way.
Yeah, and just with regards to the second part of the question there, about sort of understood, Alan, it was about reaching out when we reach out to an individual and then, it's not been addressed, how do we proceed from there? Well, this is where sort of transparency is key in communication. There's a responsibility piece in there as well. And if we're clear about how we're looking after mental health and we act not, as we speak, and we go through the processes that we need to go through, and we're clear about that, then that's when we can refer to internal processes, internal HR processes as well, and disciplinary processes. But we have to be clear about what we're doing at all times. And it's not about chasing somebody down, and it's not about pinning blame on somebody or making somebody feel bad. It's about protection of them, but they have to take some responsibility for that as well, because we also have the organization to protect. And so I think, making it clear at every stage what's happening, and having expressed conversations. Line managers, for example, can have expressed conversations with staff members and be frank about, I'm concerned about what I've seen. Perhaps it's not a performance issue, but actually, I'm a bit concerned that you haven't been as vocal lately. I'm a bit concerned that you seem a bit withdrawn. Is there anything that's going on there? And of course, you can always lead a horse to water in that sort of sense, but you can't sort of make them drink. And so, it's just about being clear about what your sort of ideas are, and being clear about what you're thinking, and giving opportunity. And of course, where that's not taken, we then have to go through internal processes, but be clear about why that is.
Christian, have we got time for one more question?
Oh, yeah, we have time for one more question. Go ahead. Yeah.
Sure. Lastly, then, once organisations have put in a global EAP or a wellbeing programme, or coupling those two things together, what does success look like?
Success looks like people using it. And I think that, the numbers speak for themselves. I think when you look at the utilization of programs, and you look at the wide variety of programs that are often available through an EAP, there's something for everyone. There's information, or there's direct services, or there's coaching. So I think, using the programs across the board, and touching all of them. And then I think the other piece about the success is, in order to do that, you've got to communicate, and you've got to communicate with key messages that make a difference, that are relevant to the audiences that you have in your organization. And I think if you've got a program in place and individuals are using it, you're very well protected from identifying any risks to the organization, because all of that information lies in the data, in the utilization data.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I guess we're at the end of this webinar. I really want to thank our two panelists, Mary-Hélène and James, for participating today and sharing their insight with us. A warm thanks to Alan, to WBN, for this great opportunity to have this space to discuss this topic with you today. You will receive a quick survey at the end of this webinar where you can add your comments. It's very important for us to hear from you and to get your feedback. And yeah, once again, thank you very much for attending this webinar. Bye-bye.
And thank you on behalf of WBN, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.